My name is Brooke Thomas, and I'm 38 years old. The last time I sat at my parents' table, I said no to giving my sister another $12,000. The room went quiet for half a second. Then my mother looked at me like I had just slapped her and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You've become unstable." The same woman who spent 20 years calling me the strong one, the reliable one, the daughter who never failed the family. My sister didn't even try to hide her smile. My father didn't say a word. He simply took out his phone and blocked my number while I was still standing there. My mother leaned closer and delivered the sentence she meant as a final humiliation. "You'll be crawling back on your knees begging us by Christmas." Christmas came. I never called. 6 months later, their lawyer's certified letter arrived. Page 1 was written to intimidate me into signing. Page 2 made me sit down hard on the kitchen floor and laugh until my eyes watered. Because the document they sent to break me had just handed me the quietest, cleanest proof that I had never been the one who needed to beg. I stayed on that floor for a while. The linoleum was cold through my scrubs, and the letter sat open in my lap, and I let myself feel something I hadn't felt in a year. Not triumph. Something steadier than that. Something like solid ground. Above me, on the counter, was a blue folder I'd kept in the back of my closet for 13 years. I'd carried it into the kitchen that morning without quite knowing why. Now I did. In my line of work, unstable is a real word with a real meaning. It describes a patient whose blood pressure is dropping, whose rhythm won't hold, who could crash between one breath and the next. When we call someone unstable, we move faster. We don't insult them. We save them. My mother used the word to mean a daughter who had finally stopped paying. I promise you, I'll show you exactly what page 2 proved. But it only lands if you first understand what I'd been quietly carrying and what I finally refused to carry anymore. If you've ever been the strong one in your family, the one who always had to fix it, the one whose no gets treated like a betrayal, do me a favor and stay with me. Somewhere in the next few minutes is the reason I stopped explaining myself. And if you've got a story like that too, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave it in the comments. It helps me more than you know. So let me take you back to where all of this actually started. Not the dinner. Not the letter. A hospital hallway, 13 years ago. In the spring of 2013, my father had a heart attack in the parking lot of a hardware store. He was 56. He made it to the hospital, and the cardiologist used the phrase, significant event, which is doctor language for we almost lost him. I was 25, a year into my first job as a floor nurse, and I was the only one in the family who didn't fall apart in that waiting room. My mother cried. My sister Chloe, who was 20 at the time, cried louder. And I did what I've always done. I read the paperwork. Somewhere between the discharge instructions and the follow-up appointments, a very tired man from the hospital's financial office mentioned that a man my father's age, with a cardiac history, should think hard about life insurance while he still could. He said it gently, the way you say a thing you know a family can't afford. My mother waved it away. My father, groggy and gray in his gown, signed a medical release without reading it, and told me to handle whatever needed handling, so I handled it. I called an agent named Ruth Callahan at a company called Cardinal State Life. Ruth was patient with me in a way I've never forgotten. She explained that my father would have to be the insured person. He'd need a phone interview, a records check, the whole process. And that because of his heart, the premium would not be small. But she also explained something I didn't fully understand at 25, and wouldn't understand the weight of for a long time. Someone had to be the owner of the policy. The owner controls it. The owner pays for it. The owner decides who the money goes to. My father was the insured. But my father couldn't be trusted with a payment schedule, and my mother couldn't either, and Chloe was a child in a grown woman's body. So I signed as the owner, $300 a month, drafted automatically from my account on the first, every month, for as long as it took. My father signed the papers he had to sign and never once asked which line was which. To him it was, the insurance we got after the scare. To my mother it was, your father's policy. Over the years, the story smoothed itself out at family dinners until it became a simple, comfortable thing everyone believed. Dad took care of it. Dad has a policy. Nobody ever asked whose name was on top. I didn't correct them. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself a lot of things. Because here's what you have to understand about being the strong one. It isn't a compliment. It's a job description. And the pay is that everyone gets to stop worrying about you. It started young. I was the daughter who read the bills when my parents fought about them. The one who learned to forge calm at 9 because somebody in the house had to. Chloe was the daughter you protected. I was the daughter you leaned on. Nobody decided that on purpose. It just set. The way concrete sets. And by the time I was grown, it was simply the shape of the family, invisible and load-bearing. You don't question the wall that's holding the roof up. You only notice it the day it decides to stop. Over the next 11 years, I paid for that policy without missing a single month. And I did something else, too. I rescued my sister. The first time was 2016. Chloe was behind on rent and about to be evicted, and my mother called me at 2 in the morning and I sent $6,500 before the sun came up. The second time was a car she needed for a job she lost anyway, $4,200. The third time, $3,800, was a phone and a deposit and something she never fully explained. The fourth was medical, a real emergency for her daughter, and I didn't even hesitate on that one. $5,500. I kept track of all of it the way nurses keep charts. Not because I planned to use it, but because writing things down is how I stay calm. Dates, amounts, what it was for. By 2024, the total was $29,000, and the last entry was the biggest. That fifth rescue, in the fall of 2024, was $9,000, and it was for a debt. A specific debt. A collections account with Chloe's name on it that had grown teeth. I paid it down and told her, as kindly as I could, that this was the last time I'd do it without a real conversation about how she got there. She thanked me. She cried. She meant it, in the way she always meant it. Remember that number. Remember what it was for. It didn't stay fixed. There's a particular Thanksgiving I still think about. It was maybe 2019. My uncle, my father's brother, asked across the table how Dad was doing, health-wise, money-wise, at his age. My father set down his fork and said, with real dignity, that he'd made sure the family was covered, that a man plans for these things. My uncle nodded, impressed. My mother beamed. And I sat there with a forkful of stuffing and said nothing. Because the premium that made that sentence true had left my account 11 days earlier, and correcting the record would have turned a warm holiday into a scene about me. So I let him have it. I let him have all of them. That was the trade. The one I made 100 times without ever once calling it a trade. Their comfort for my silence. Their version of events for my money. I told myself it was generous. Looking back, I think it was just easier to be invisible than to be resented. At every holiday, my father accepted quiet credit for a policy he had never paid a dollar into, and my mother told the relatives that Brooke was doing well. Brooke could always be counted on. Brooke was so stable. And I sat there and let them, because the alternative, saying I've been carrying this family on a nurse's salary for over a decade, sounded like exactly the kind of thing an unstable person would say. Then, in October of last year, they asked for the 6th time. The ask came the way all of them came, wrapped in worry and delivered by my mother. Chloe was in trouble again. It was urgent again. It was $12,000, and there was a due date. And there was no thank you attached to the front of it, only an assumption. And for the first time in my life, I heard myself say the smallest, largest word I own. No. I want to be honest about that dinner, because the version in my head has been polished by everything that happened after, and I don't want to lie to you. It was a Sunday in October at my parents' house in Dayton. I'd driven the 54 miles from Cincinnati the way I'd driven it 100 times, on autopilot up I-75, already tired before I arrived. My mother made a roast. Chloe was there with her daughter, Nora, who is 8, and who spent most of the meal drawing horses on a napkin and showing them to me one at a time. She's the only person at that table who ever looked genuinely happy to see me. I mention Nora because she was the reason I still came to those dinners at all. Somewhere in the last couple of years, the visits had quietly stopped being about my parents and started being about that little girl and her horses. I'd bring her a fresh pack of markers. She'd narrate each drawing like a nature documentary, very serious about which horse was the fastest and why. For 1 hour a month, I got to be an aunt instead of a resource. It was the only hour I ever felt like a person in that house instead of a plan everyone was counting on. The ask came with dessert. My mother set down the coffee and said in her soft voice that Chloe was going through something hard, that families help each other, that it would just be 12,000 this once. My father added that was the responsible thing, that we didn't air these matters, that a person in my position could clearly afford it. A person in my position. As if he knew what my position was. I set my fork down. I told them I couldn't do it this time. Not wouldn't. Couldn't. In the sense that I had finally reached the end of something I didn't have a word for yet. I said it quietly. I said it once. The table went silent for a beat. The way a room goes silent when a monitor stops making the sound it's supposed to make. My mother didn't say I was wrong. She said I was unstable. She said it like a diagnosis, like a boundary was a symptom, like the problem wasn't the request but the refusal. She said the family had noticed I'd been different. She said maybe I needed to talk to someone. I've turned that word over in my hands more times than I can count. Unstable. From a woman who had never once seen me flinch. I have held pressure on a stranger's wound while his family screamed in the hallway. I have told a father his son wasn't going to make it, and then walked into the next room an hour later and done it again for someone else's father. Steady is the only thing I've ever been. But steadiness that keeps saying yes looks like love, and steadiness that finally says no looks. To the people who depend on it, like a machine that's broken down, they didn't think I'd become unstable. They just felt the floor move for the first time and had no word for it except the one they threw at me. Chloe didn't argue for herself. She didn't have to. She just watched, and there was the smallest smile at the corner of her mouth. The smile of someone who has never once had to be the strong one and knows she never will. Then my mother leaned across her nice roast and her nice coffee and told me I'd be crawling back on my knees, begging them by Christmas. I remember thinking, very clearly and very calmly, Christmas is 2 months away. I'll mark it too. My father did the thing that still, of everything, is the hardest to explain to people who didn't grow up in a house like mine. He didn't yell. He didn't throw me out. He took out his phone, right there at the table. And by the time I reached my car in the driveway, my number was blocked. He wanted me to feel it as I left. He wanted the last word to be a closed door I could hear from the porch. He blocked me first. And I let him keep that ending. His kind of ending, the kind where he decides, for 6 months. Nora waved at me from the front window as I backed out. I waved back. That's the part I carried home. People imagine that going no contact is dramatic, that there are letters and speeches and a moment where you slam something down. Mostly it's just quiet. The quiet started that night and didn't lift for a long time. I didn't call. They didn't call. Or rather, my father couldn't, having blocked the only number he had for me, and my mother chose not to, because in our family, silence is a kind of pressure, a slow squeeze meant to make you fold. I didn't fold, but I won't pretend I was fine. I second-guessed myself for weeks. I'm a person who fixes things. That's not a hobby. It's a reflex. And turning it off felt like holding my own hand away from a wound. I'd reach for my phone to check on Nora and remember I had no clean way to do it. I'd lie awake running the math on Chloe's 12,000, wondering what trouble meant this time, wondering if I was the villain in a story I couldn't hear being told about me. Then Christmas came. I'd braced for it, honestly. My mother had made it a deadline, and some small, tired part of me half expected to crack right on schedule to show up with a check and an apology just to make the ache stop. Instead, I worked a holiday shift, because nurses do, and I came home to my own apartment and cooked for one and slept for 9 hours straight for the first time in months. I did not beg. I did not crawl. The prophecy came due and quietly defaulted. I won't pretend the quiet was all peace. There was a Tuesday in January when a patient's daughter, grown, exhausted, kind, thanked me for staying past my shift. And I had to step into the supply closet for a minute because it undid me. A stranger's daughter could see me. My own mother had looked straight at 13 years of me and called it instability. Some nights the doubt got loud enough that I'd draft a text to Nora's mother and delete it, draft one to my mother and delete that too. No contact isn't a wall you build once. It's a decision you make again every single morning, and some mornings it costs more than others. But $300 still left my account on the first of that month, and the first of the next, and the one after that. Because here is the distinction I made, the one I need you to understand, the one that would end up mattering more than anything. I was done funding my sister. I was not done keeping my father alive on paper. Those are two different things, and the fact that everyone in my family treated them as the same thing was the whole problem in a single sentence. I could be finished with their entitlement and still not let a man's life insurance lapse because he'd hurt my feelings. A lapsed policy on a 69-year-old with a cardiac history doesn't come back. You don't get to rebuy it later at a friendlier price. If I stopped, 13 years of premiums evaporated, and so did every dollar of value inside it, including the part I'd quietly set aside for someone who couldn't protect herself. So I kept paying, in silence, for people who had blocked my number. I didn't tell anyone. It wasn't a favor I was collecting on. It was just the shape of who I am, and I'd stopped apologizing for it. In February, my phone rang with a number I did recognize, Ruth Callahan, from Cardinal State Life. She was calling about a routine review, she said, the kind they do on older policies. Then, in the friendly, oblivious way of a woman doing her job, she added something that made me go still in my own kitchen. Your family reached out with some questions about the loan value on the policy, she said. I told them I could only discuss specifics with the owner, of course, but I wanted to make sure everything's current on your end. I hadn't told my family anything about the policy in years. They didn't know the numbers. They didn't know the value. But they knew there was a policy. They'd always known that much. And now, apparently, they were asking a stranger what they could pull out of it. I thanked Ruth, and hung up, and stood there with the phone warm in my hand. And for the first time I felt the quiet change temperature. It wasn't peace anymore. It was the pause before something. They were about to ask a lawyer for something only I could give. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday in the middle of April. You have to sign for certified mail. That's the whole point of it. It's designed to prove, later, that you can't claim you never received it. The carrier handed me a little screen and a stylus, and I signed for the very letter that would ask me to sign for something much larger. And there was a bitter kind of symmetry in that I didn't appreciate until afterward. The return address was a firm in Dayton, Whitaker Law Group. I didn't know the name. I set the envelope on my kitchen counter and let it sit there for a full hour while I made tea I didn't drink, because I'm a person who reads paperwork carefully, and I wanted to be ready. When I finally opened it, page 1 did exactly what it was built to do. It was written to frighten me. It used the word demand more than once and the word father exactly once. It informed me that my parents required my cooperation regarding a family life insurance policy intended to address Mr. Thomas's ongoing medical needs. That a loan against the policy's value was necessary and time-sensitive, and that my signature was required to authorize it. It gave me 30 days. It suggested, in the flat language lawyers use it to make pressure sound like procedure, that my continued refusal to participate in good faith was creating hardship for a sick man. Medical needs. Hardship. A sick man. It was a good letter if the goal was guilt. I read page 1 twice. Not because it confused me. It didn't. But because I learned a long time ago that the first read of anything is emotional and the second read is the true one. On the second pass, I noticed what the letter was careful never to say. It never named a hospital. It never named a doctor, a procedure, a bill, a date. It gestured at medical needs, the way you gesture at something you're hoping nobody will ask you to point to. A real medical emergency arrives with paper attached. This one arrived with adjectives. Then I turned to page 2. Page 2 wasn't a letter. It was a document. An actual statement from Cardinal State Life. Attached, I would realize later, so the lawyer could identify the account and show me they weren't bluffing about which policy they meant. Someone in that office had pulled it and stapled it to the demand without reading what it actually said. The first line stopped me. Policy owner, Brooke Thomas. Not my father, not the family. Me. My name. On the line that controls everything. Exactly where it had been for 13 years, and exactly where every single person in that Dayton dining room had forgotten it was. And that was the smallest surprise on the page. 2 lines down was the beneficiary. In our family's telling, if anyone had ever bothered to imagine it, the money would go to my mother. That's how these things are supposed to work. That's the version they'd built their whole request on top of. The statement said something else. Beneficiary, Nora Thomas, minor. Custodian, Brooke Thomas. Nora, the 8-year-old who drew me horses on a napkin. I'd named her years ago, quietly, the way I did everything, and set myself as the custodian so the money couldn't be spent by anyone but her. For her, when she was grown. I'd protected her before I ever knew she'd need protecting. And then there was the last page in the packet, the one they actually needed me to sign. And it wasn't just a loan request. It was a disbursement instruction. A direction for where the borrowed money would go. It didn't route a dollar to a hospital. It didn't name a cardiologist or a clinic or a pharmacy. It named a collections account. I knew that account. I'd paid it down myself, for $9,000, in the fall of 2024. There's a specific feeling that comes when 2 things you'd thought were separate turn out to be the same thing. It isn't quite shock. It's closer to vertigo. The floor of the story shifting because you've finally seen the beam running underneath it. My father's medical emergency and my sister's old debt weren't neighbors. They were the same room, and I'd been standing in it the whole time with the lights off. I sat down. Not gracefully. My knees just decided, and I ended up on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, and I laughed until my eyes watered. I want to be clear about that laugh, because it wasn't cruel and it wasn't mockery. It was 13 years of pressure finding the smallest crack and pouring out all at once. They had called me unstable. They had announced to a full table that they didn't need me. My own father had blocked me first, to make sure I understood I was the one being cut off. And then they had mailed me, certified, signed for, impossible to deny, the one document that proved they couldn't move a single dollar without me, that the medical emergency was my sister's old debt, grown up and dressed in a hospital gown, that the money they were reaching for had a child's name on it, that the whole time they were teaching me I was the weak link, I had been the only thing holding the chain together. They'd sent me the proof that every word they'd said about me was a lie. I've thought a lot about why it came out as laughter and not tears. I think tears would have meant it still hurt in the old way. That some part of me was still waiting for them to turn into the people I'd needed. The laugh meant that part had finally let go. You cannot be wounded by a verdict you've stopped respecting. They had spent a year telling a whole courtroom of relatives that I was the problem. And then they had mailed me the one exhibit that cleared my name. And the sheer clumsy irony of it broke something loose in my chest that had been clenched tight for 13 years. I stopped laughing eventually. Then I did what I always do. I verified. I didn't call a lawyer. I want you to notice that because it matters. I'm a nurse, and when something important is on the line, I don't argue about it. I confirm it, line by line, the same way I confirm a patient before I give a medication. Full name, date of birth, no assumptions. I called Cardinal State Life the next morning and asked for Ruth Callahan by name. I gave her my information and told her I needed to review the policy as the owner. There was a pause while she pulled the file, and then a longer pause. The kind a careful person takes when they realize the person on the phone already knows more than they expected. "You're the owner of record," she confirmed. "You have been since 2013. I asked her to walk me through the payment history. She did. 156 payments, she said. Every one of them on time. Every one of them drawn from an account in my name. $300 a month for 13 years. $46,800. From a woman her clients had described, I'd bet, as a difficult relative who wouldn't cooperate. 13 years of proof they'd forgotten existed. I don't know why the number of payments hit me harder than the dollar amount. But it did. 156. 156 first of the months. 156 small, silent choices to keep a man insured. Most of them made on days when he wasn't speaking to me. Some of them made after he'd blocked my number. Each one had felt like nothing at the time. Just a line on a bank statement, a withdrawal I barely noticed. Stacked up and read back to me by a stranger. They sounded like exactly what they were. A decade of love no one had asked for and no one had thanked me for. Drafted automatically, on time, every time. I asked about the beneficiary. Ruth's voice softened. "The beneficiary is a minor," she said. "Nora Thomas. You listed her yourself, and you're on file as custodian. That was in 2018. The year Nora turned 2. The year I'd quietly decided that whatever happened to the rest of us, that little girl would have something waiting. Then I asked about the loan, about the disbursement, about where the money was supposed to go. Ruth was professional, and she was careful, and she told me only what she was allowed to tell the owner. But she confirmed the thing I already knew from the paper in my hand. The requested disbursement wasn't structured to pay a medical provider. The payee on the instruction was a collections account. She read me enough of the reference number that my stomach turned over, because I recognized it. It was the same account I'd cleared for Chloe 2 years earlier. $9,000, ignored for 2 years, does not sit still. It grows. Late fees, interest, a second account, a judgment maybe. By the spring of this year, it had become something close to $50,000, and my parents' brilliant plan was to reach into a policy they didn't own, pull out nearly everything it was worth, and use it to make my sister's problem disappear one more time. She hadn't fixed the thing I'd paid to fix. She'd just found a bigger wallet. Mine. I want to be fair here, because it would be easy to make my sister a cartoon, and she isn't one. I don't think Chloe woke up one morning and decided to rob a child. I think she did the only thing she'd ever been allowed to do. She let a problem grow until someone else's hands were forced, and then she called those hands unfair for existing. The system that raised her never once let her feel the bottom of anything. My parents spent 33 years making sure her mistakes landed on me. Of course she reached for the policy. Reaching for me was the only survival skill anyone had ever taught her. I thanked Ruth. I sat at my kitchen table, the counter, the floor, and now the table. I was working my way around that kitchen one revelation at a time, and I did the math that mattered. For 13 years, the ledger in my head had always come out the same way. I owed them. Not money, exactly. I owed them my steadiness, my availability, my endless yes. That's what strong people owe, isn't it? For the first time, the math came out clean the other direction. I didn't owe them anything, not a dollar, not a signature, not an explanation. But someone in this story was owed something, a truth. And she was 8 years old, and she had no idea any of this was happening, and she was still drawing horses on napkins in a house full of adults who were about to spend her future to cover her mother's mistake. Before I tell you what I did next, let me ask you something, because I genuinely want to know. Has your family ever called you selfish, difficult, dramatic, unstable, for the simple act of stopping the money? If it's happened to you, tell me in the comments. I read them. And I think you already know it wasn't really about the money at all. They found out I'd read the letter, and the tactics changed overnight. The first call came from my mother. My father, remember, had blocked me, so he couldn't reach me even now, which is its own small poem. But my mother had never blocked anyone in her life, because blocking people removes your ability to keep working on them. Suddenly, I was sweetheart again. Suddenly, the word unstable had never been spoken at any table. Her voice on the voicemail was warm and worried and full of family, and she said we'd all gotten carried away, and that she missed me, and that we should put the ugliness behind us and talk like adults. Warmth from my mother has always had a price tag stapled to it. I just used to pay it without looking. I called her back, because I'm not a coward, and because part of me, the part that had waited 20 years to be seen correctly, still wanted to hear her say she understood. She didn't. What she did was pivot to Nora. "Do it for Nora," she said. "If you care about that little girl the way you say you do, you'll help her mother get back on her feet." I want you to sit with how that landed. She was asking me to drain the account I'd built for Nora, in Nora's name, in order to prove I loved Nora. She had no idea she was quoting my own reason back at me and getting it exactly backwards. She thought for Nora was a card she was playing. She didn't know it was the whole deck, and I was holding it. When guilt about Nora didn't move me, she reached further back. She started talking about when we were girls, about the summer our grandmother was sick, and I'd sat with her every afternoon, about how I'd always been the one who showed up. She said it like a compliment. It wasn't. It was a reminder of the role, a way of saying, this is who you are, this is who you've always been. Don't you dare become someone else now. My mother has a genius for turning your best qualities into a leash. She can make your kindness feel like a contract you signed as a child and can never renegotiate. I told her, evenly, that I wasn't going to authorize the loan. She was quiet for a moment. Then my father got on the line. She must have had him waiting, and he said one sentence because my father has always believed that the fewer words a man uses, the more right he is. "Don't make this ugly," he said. I'm sorry, not thank you for 13 years of premiums I never knew about. Not you were right to be hurt. Just a warning, dressed as advice, from a man who still couldn't imagine a version of events in which he was the one who owed. I said, "It was already ugly, Dad. You just never had to look at it before." He hung up. He's good at that. I found out later what they'd been telling people in the meantime, because families always leak. According to the version circulating among the relatives, I had come into some money and changed, grown cold and superior, turned my back on a sick father in his hour of need. That was the story. Not a word about premiums or ownership or a collections account or a lawyer's letter. Just the unstable daughter who'd finally shown her true colors. I understood then that whatever I did, some corner of that family would keep telling that story forever, and that I would have to be able to live with being known incorrectly by people who had never once asked me directly. That's a strange kind of grief. You don't just lose the people. You lose your own name in their mouths. The last call that week was Chloe. And Chloe is where the whole thing finally showed its face. She started the way she always starts, defensive before there's anything to defend against, cast as the victim of a story no one else was telling. She said I'd always judged her. She said I'd always made her feel small by being so capable. She said it must be nice to have so much that I could sit in judgment of people who had so little. And then, because Chloe cannot hold a lie under pressure the way our parents can, she said the things she should not have said. "I just needed to move some money around before anyone noticed," she said. "That's all it was. It got away from me. If you just sign, it goes back to normal and nobody has to know." Before anyone noticed. It got away from me. She thought she was guilt-tripping me. She just handed me a confession. I didn't use it against her. I didn't shout. I asked her one question, gently, because I did still love her. In the complicated way you love a person who has never once had to grow up. I asked, "Does Nora know any of this is happening?" There was a silence on the line, And in that silence was every answer I needed. I'd like to tell you the choice was easy after that. It wasn't. The hardest part was still ahead, and it came from a direction I didn't expect. It came from a friend. Meredith Kane is a nurse I've worked beside for 9 years, and she is the person I call when I need someone who won't flinch. I told her everything, the whole 13 years of it, over coffee in the hospital cafeteria at the end of a shift. She listened the way good nurses listen, without interrupting. And when I was done, she said the thing I hadn't let myself say out loud. "You know you don't have to fight them at all, right?" she said. "You're the owner. You could surrender the policy tomorrow. Take the cash value yourself. $52,000, Brooke. Walk away, block them right back, and never see any of them again. Let them explain to their lawyer why the account is empty." For one long second, I wanted to. Meredith wasn't wrong that it was clean. That was the seduction of it. How clean it was. No confrontation, no 54-mile drive, no sitting across a table from my father while he decided, one more time, that I wasn't worth a thank you. Just a form, a phone call, and an empty account where their plan used to be. Revenge that asked nothing of me but a signature I was actually allowed to make. For a woman who'd spent 13 years doing the hard, invisible thing, the easy, visible thing had a pull I hadn't seen coming. I want to be honest about that, because I think the wanting is important. $52,000 is real money to a nurse. And the picture she painted was so clean. Me, finally taking something for once, closing the door on all of it, letting them feel for a single afternoon what it's like to reach for help and find nothing there. After 13 years of pouring myself into people who called me unstable for stopping, the idea of simply taking the pool and walking away was almost dizzying. I sat with it. I made myself actually look at it instead of just enjoying it. And here's what I saw. That $52,000 wasn't sitting in a vacuum. It was the value of a policy with a child's name on the other line. If I surrendered it and pocketed the cash, the person I'd be taking it from wasn't my mother or my father or even Chloe. It was Nora, the one account in this entire mess that had been built for someone innocent. I'd be the one to empty it, to protect myself. I'd become exactly what they'd spent a year calling me, the unstable one, the selfish one, the daughter who finally cracked and grabbed what she could. I'd be handing them the ending they'd already written for me. And worse, I'd be handing it to them true. There is a kind of winning that is just losing in a nicer outfit. Taking the money would have felt like power, but it would have made me a smaller version of the very people I was trying to get free of. It would have turned me into one more adult spending Nora's future to solve my own feelings. I didn't want their money. I'd never wanted their money. What I wanted, I finally understood, was the truth back. I wanted the record corrected. I wanted, just once, for the thing I'd actually done to be spoken out loud in the room where they'd lied about me. So I made my decision, and it was the strangest decision I've ever made, because it involved doing almost nothing. I wouldn't sign the loan. I wouldn't surrender the policy. I wouldn't take $1. I'd keep paying the premium because Nora's future was still worth $300 a month to me. And I would drive the 54 miles back to Dayton, one more time, and I would sit at that table, and I would read 2 names out loud. That was it. That was the whole plan. Say the true thing, in the true place, to their faces. If it were you, sitting where I was sitting, the letter in front of you, 30 days on the clock, a family on the other end of the phone insisting you owe them your name on a line, what would you do? Would you sign? Would you take the money and run? Or would you drive back one last time and say the thing out loud? I already knew my answer. I just needed to go say it. I drove up to Dayton on the second Sunday in May. It's 54 miles from my door to theirs, an hour on I-75 if the traffic behaves. I'd driven it 100 times to help, to write a check, to calm a crisis, to sit at that table and be counted on. This was the first time in my life I was driving it to stop something instead of start it. I brought the blue folder. They were expecting me. My mother had set out coffee, which is what my mother does when she believes she's already won. And my father was in his chair at the head of the table with the loan packet squared up in front of him, a pen resting on top of it like a period at the end of a sentence he'd already finished writing. Chloe was there. Nora was not. She'd been sent to a neighbor's, which told me they understood, on some level, that this was not a conversation for a child. Even they knew. Same table, same chairs. The same three people who had called me unstable, waiting for me to do the thing I had always done. My father slid the packet an inch toward me and told me it was simple. Just a signature. A family matter. He said it the way you'd explain something obvious to a slow child, as if the past 6 months had been a misunderstanding I was finally coming to my senses about. My mother said she was so glad I'd come, that she'd known I would. That family always finds its way back. They genuinely believed I was there to sign. I didn't sit down. I set the blue folder on the table and opened it, and I took out the statement. The real one. The one their own lawyer had mailed me by accident. And I laid it on top of their pen. And then, I did the only thing I know how to do when everything is on the line. I read the names. I read them the way I read a wristband before I give a dose. Out loud, slow, unhurried. Because a name read out loud in a quiet room has a weight that no argument can match. Policy owner, I said. Brooke Thomas. I let it sit. Beneficiary, Nora Thomas. Minor, custodian, Brooke Thomas. The room changed. My mother's mouth opened and nothing came out. My father's eyes went to the paper and then to me, and then to the paper again. And I watched him do the math I'd already done, watched him understand for the first time that the thing he'd been trying to command me to sign was mine, had always been mine, and that the lawyer he'd hired to frighten me had mailed me the proof of it. Chloe made a small sound. She'd known part of it. She hadn't known this part. My mother recovered first, the way she always does. She said there'd been a mistake, that of course it was a family policy, that I'd only put my name on it for convenience all those years ago. She reached for the warm voice again. She said, "Sweetheart, this doesn't change anything." "It changes everything," I said. "It just doesn't change it the way you wanted." My father tried to take the paper. He reached across the table for it. The old reflex, the assumption that anything resting on his table belonged to him. I put my hand flat on it once, the way you stop a patient from pulling at a line. "It's addressed to me," I said. "Your lawyer made sure of that. Certified. I signed for it." He drew his hand back. I think that was the first moment he truly understood the ground had shifted. Not when he read his own name missing from the owner line. When he reached for something on his own table and it didn't come. I told them what the disbursement page said. I told them I knew the loan wasn't for a hospital. I told them I knew it was the same debt I'd cleared in 2024, back with interest, and that they'd wrapped my sister's collections account in the phrase "Dad's medical needs" and mailed it to me over a lawyer's letterhead. I said all of it calmly, without raising my voice, because the facts didn't need volume. They only needed to be said in that room. And then I gave my father one clean chance. I've thought about this 100 times since, and I know I gave it to him on purpose, because some part of me was still that girl in the waiting room in 2013, still hoping the man in the gown would one day notice who'd stayed. I said, "I paid for this for 13 years, Dad. Every month. While you were blocking my number, I never stopped. Because it was never about you being right. It was about Nora being okay." I paused. "You don't have to sign anything. You just have to say thank you. That's the whole price. Just once." He looked at me for a long moment. My father is not a stupid man. He understood exactly what I was offering, and exactly how little it would cost him, and exactly how much it would give me. And he chose the other thing. He always chooses the other thing. "You always did think you were better than us," he said. That was his answer. Not thank you. Not, I'm sorry. Not even a fight worth having. Just the oldest weapon in the house. The one that had worked on me my whole life. The accusation that caring about the truth is the same as looking down on the people lying about it. For the first time, It didn't work. I picked the statement back up off their pen. I closed the blue folder. And I said the only sentence I'd driven 54 miles to say. I'm not signing, and Nora's future isn't yours to borrow against. Chloe followed me out. I half expected another demand, or the old accusation, but she just stood in the driveway with her arms crossed against the cold, and she said the only honest thing she managed that whole day. I didn't know you were still paying it, she said. After Dad blocked you. I didn't know. I told her I knew she didn't. Then I asked her to do one thing. Not for me, for Nora. I asked her to leave that account alone, forever. No matter how bad it got. She looked at the ground for a long moment. Then she nodded. It wasn't an apology. And it wasn't a transformation. It was a woman making one small, correct choice in a driveway, which was more than I'd expected and less than I'd once dreamed of, and I decided to let it be enough for that day. Then I put the pen down where I'd found it, still capped, and I left. I drove home lighter than I'd been in 13 years. Nothing exploded. I think that's what surprised me most. There was no lawsuit because there was nothing to sue over. You cannot force the owner of a policy to take a loan against it. Whitaker Law Group, whoever he is, had sent a letter built entirely on the assumption that I was a difficult relative standing in the way of a family plan. And the moment his own attached document proved I was the owner, the whole thing dissolved. A demand only has power if the person receiving it actually owes something. I didn't. I never had. The loan simply couldn't happen. It didn't collapse dramatically, it just quietly stopped existing, the way a plan does when you finally look at the ground it was standing on and find there was never any ground at all. Somewhere in Dayton, my parents had to call a lawyer and explain that the money they'd promised themselves was attached to a person they'd spent a year insulting, and that person had said no, and there was nothing further to be done. I heard about the rest secondhand, weeks later, the way you hear about a house you used to live in. Whitaker, the lawyer, had apparently sent my parents a much shorter letter than the one he'd sent me. The kind a professional writes when he realizes his clients handed him a story the documents don't support. There would be no loan. There was no basis for one. He'd been hired to lean on the owner of a policy, and the owner had turned out to be the difficult daughter who'd been paying for it in silence for 13 years, with every legal right to refuse. I don't imagine that conversation was pleasant for anyone at that table. I found I didn't need it to be. I never needed them ruined. I only ever needed them stopped. What happened instead was silence. Real silence this time, the kind that means it. My mother stopped calling. My father, of course, had blocked me months ago, so he simply continued to have blocked me, which is the closest that man will ever come to consistency. The warmth evaporated the instant it stopped being useful, which told me everything about what it had always been. I felt the loss of them. I won't pretend I didn't. There's a specific grief in being finally, completely right about people you'd spent your whole life hoping you were wrong about. Being right cost me a mother and a father and the lifelong job of being needed. It cost me the fantasy, and I hadn't realized how much I'd been living inside it, that if I just carried enough, one day they'd set the weight down for me and say, "I see you now." They were never going to say it. The letter proved that too, in its way. Chloe was the one who surprised me. A few weeks after Dayton, she texted me. No ask attached, which was its own small miracle. In 33 years, I'm not sure Chloe had ever sent me a message that wasn't building toward a request. It was 3 words. You protected her. That's all it said. You protected her. It didn't fix us. It didn't erase the smile at the table or the years of getting away with everything. But it was the truest thing she had ever sent me. And I think, for the first time, she understood that the person she'd been raised to resent had been the one quietly standing between her daughter and the wreckage. I wrote back one line. I told her Nora's account was safe, that it would always be safe, and that if she ever wanted help that wasn't money, real help, the kind with a limit and a plan, I was reachable, not for the debts. For her, if she ever decided to become someone her daughter could count on the way that little girl deserved. She hasn't taken me up on it yet, She might not. The change in Chloe, if it ever comes, will be small and slow and imperfect, and I've made my peace with the fact that I don't control it. Being right cost me almost everyone. It was still the cheapest thing I ever paid for. It's late May now, and I want to tell you about the folder. For 13 years, that blue folder held a secret. It held the policy, the payment records, the beneficiary form, the quiet proof of everything I'd carried and never mentioned. I'd kept it in the back of my closet like something shameful, when the truth is, it was the most honest thing I owned. Last week I emptied it. I took out the old statements and filed them properly, and I gave the folder a new job. On the tab, I wrote one word: Nora. I opened a small account in her name, a real one, mine to fund, hers to receive when she's grown, with the kind of guardrails that mean no adult in a hard month can ever talk their way into it. I put a copy of the policy statement inside the folder, the same page that had once been a weapon aimed at me, so that someday, when she's old enough to understand it, she'll know that somebody in this family was reading the paperwork on her behalf the whole time. That before she could protect herself, there was a name on the line that made sure she wouldn't have to. That, it turns out, is what strong was supposed to mean all along. Not the one who never says no, the one who knows exactly what to say yes to. I still pay the $300 on the first of every month. I probably always will. My father is 69, and his heart is still his heart. And when the day comes that the policy does what policies do, the money won't go to the people who tried to spend it early. It'll go where I put it, years before any of them thought to look. I see Nora sometimes, on neutral ground, at a park halfway between our two cities. Chloe brings her, and the two of us are careful and quiet with each other in a way that is almost its own kind of respect. Nora doesn't know any of it. Not the letter, not the account, not the word her grandmother used about me. To her, I'm just the aunt who shows up with markers and takes the horse drawings seriously. Last time, she informed me that the gray one was retired now and had a job teaching the younger horses. And I told her that sounded like the most important job of all, and I meant it more than she could possibly understand. She still draws me horses. I keep everyone in the front of a blue folder where the important papers go. My family handed me a word this year: unstable. They meant it as the end of me. I've traded it for a quieter one, and it's the word that was on the top line the whole time. Owner. Of my choices, of my name, of the line I finally held. So let me leave you with the only question that matters, the one I had to answer at a kitchen table with a pen I wouldn't pick up. Has your boundary ever been called selfish? Has your no ever been treated like you were tearing the family apart, when all you were doing was refusing to keep paying for a story that was never true? If it has, I hope you'll tell me how you held it. Because the people who call you unstable for stopping are almost never the ones who are ever holding anything up. Read the second page. It's always the one they hope you'll skip.